it only takes like one or two, three people to kind of make a real difference, right? It took me to sit in the front row and like be annoying and ask her questions and follow-ups and like chase her in the corridor with more questions. Like, yes, I did my part. All the fundamental knowledge that's required to do something great has to be there. It only comes with effort. Like, there is no other way around it. What I was looking for is a place where there would be kind of the problems that I don't know how to solve. The guy who hired me, he ended up writing the first check for Bardeen, and he introduced me to my co-founder. What today is table stakes for any whatever like AI company product 2 years ago literally was fiction.
Welcome to the 8 Growth Ventures podcast. Today we're honored to have Artem Harutyunyan, the visionary co-founder and CTO of Bardeen AI. Artem will share the inception of Bardeen during COVID-19's peak and insights from securing investments from Dropbox Ventures and HubSpot Ventures. Join us today as he shares his story and vision. So before we get started, let me give you a little bit background on Artem. Artem was born and raised in Armenia. In his early days, he began at the Yerevan Physics Institute before moving on to Geneva and finally settling in Silicon Valley. He earned his PhD in computer science from the Graduate School of the State of Engineering University of Armenia and the Yerevan Physics Institute, and furthered his education at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Artem, we're very honored to have you here today, and we're really excited for you to share your insights on your journey coming from Armenia, living in Europe, and then eventually settling in Silicon Valley and starting a startup. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Of course. So before we get into your journey, let me explain to some of the new listening audiences what we like to do on this podcast is obviously we like to go through your career trajectory and talk about your past, some of the lessons you've learned a lot along the way, and from there we go into more your present and then eventually to the future as you see the world evolving and where you see it all headed. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into engineering, especially in Armenia, and share a little bit of insights as you were younger and what led you to the path that you are today?
Sure. So I had a computer at home at like pretty early age, at like 4 or 5. It was my dad's computer. So my dad is a civil engineer, and I was like late 80s, so I was like 4 or 5, and he was using the computer to like design buildings and structures. It was after the earthquake, and he was there, and like I would sit on his lap and watch him use AutoCAD, or he also had some games there that I would play, like Tetris and like early PC games. So I got interested.
These are early PC computers, floppy disk.
Yeah, it's like 5-inch floppy disks.
5-inch floppy, not the 3.5, the 5.
No. 3.5
really
was like, an evolution. Yeah, it was just so it was just like 80, 86, and later it was like 286. So like 16-bit, like really first generation PCs.
The really heavy machines, but nowhere near the power that we have today.
Obviously. Yes. Yeah. And I honestly, I love those machines because I think like they were like simple enough that one person can understand like pretty much everything about it, especially when it comes to architecture and like software. And like later when I was like a student, I was just like learning them. I really appreciated the fact that like, okay, this is something that like I can entirely keep in my head. As a student, I think like these days, if you take the computers of today, like if you take like an an H100 chip from NVIDIA these days, I doubt there's like, I'm sure there are people who have a very, very deep understanding of how it works, but it's much more complex to the point where like I think for like one person it's very hard to have not just a mental model but like in-depth full understanding of everything that's going on. And so so that's how I started.
So you're 4 and 5, your dad is obviously using it for work and you're intrigued by this thing, and so that sparks your interest. And at 4 and 5, there's so much you can do. You're tapping away at a keyboard at a machine, right? So how did that get nourished? How did your dad nourish that for you? And
Yeah,
where?
I mean, so well, I mean, first of all, he let me use it. So there were like games,
Right.
and he let me play the games, and like, and again, I mean, although it was like, you know, very very expensive at a time, and it was obviously very precious. I think there were like only, I don't know, probably like just a handful of computers in all of Yerevan, but like I had I had access to it and I could play, and it was like it's like one of the worst kind of screw ups of my life. So basically, my dad at the time, he was doing his PhD, and he was also like part of his research was on a computer, and I kind of accidentally formatted the hard drive,
Oh,
and like it, and in a way that like I zero filled it, so it was like impossible to recover basically. And I did it because like back in the day, you could just like go into BIOS, and then like you, if you like hit enter, like literally hit enter twice and then click yes, it would like format your hard drive. But like, you know, talk about amazing UX, it's just like that was the default choice. And so I just saw that it was like I knew like English alphabet, and it would like the screen said like press del, and then there was a del button, so I like press del, and then like when you're in BIOS, like I couldn't read, but like I knew that like okay, I have to press enter, and then it like press enter twice, yes or no. It's like yes, why not? And so that was like my first experience where like, you know, I screwed it up pretty badly. I mean, he was pretty mad about it, and I was like, you know, I mean, it was really like meaningfully, I think, like setting back
that
for
taught you
months.
the lesson of always backing up before you press yes on the list.
Yes, exactly. I think luckily he had some backups, but I mean, even after that, it wasn't like no, you cannot touch it. I think the rule that was like you have to press a button, run away, see from afar that it boots, and when it's booted, only then you're allowed to. Uh, and I guess the joke's on him for not having the password on BIOS, but you know. But anyway, so it was like really interesting for me, and I think there was like a big part of that, like I had access to it, you know, I had that, yeah.
So obviously that could have gone a couple of ways in these earlier years, but your dad continued nourishing it, and then you eventually went to Yerevan State University. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that you learned while you were at school, and then how that built out the foundation for who you are as an engineer and as now as a CTO as well?
Yeah, so I mean, actually I wasn't in a state university. I was like in engineering university, which is like Polytech, everyone knows it, so it's like an engineering school. I think like I was like lucky because there you had like two things. That one, I think still from the kind of previous like Soviet era, they had like a good kind of fundamental math, you know, calculus, all that stuff was like at a very good level if you were kind of willing to pay attention and learn. And then in addition, we had like a few professors who were kind of who had like a profound impact because they cared, and they were like, you know, they would like come to the uh auditorium carrying like printouts from like Intel website and talking about like the latest tech and so on. And it was more like an exception than the norm. But I think I learned quite a bit from like again a handful of professors there. But more importantly, I think from the very early on, like basically I did my entrance exams um, to the university, and then like a week after. So the way it works in Armenia is that like you do entrance exams sometimes in June, and then the university starts in September. So normally in summer, like it's like a chill time. You know, you're done. It's like you're relieved of this like huge stress. You're in the university, but like starting from that summer, I started like interning at like Yerevan Physics Institute, which was again in like Soviet times, it was like one of the top research centers. Uh, and there as well, same thing. There was like, you know, people who were like really good, like world class, and what they did, and they cared. And so it was just like And basically, like throughout my university, like I would like go to school in the morning, do my classes, and then like in the afternoon I would go to the lab and would like normally stay there until very late.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit. It was the people that cared. Could it be something in you? Could it be
I
something
mean,
that they
both.
could it be something that you did behaviorally or your curiosity that potentially brought that out within them? Like
Yeah, I mean,
always like a curious, because it sounds like clearly you were a curious child pressing delete, right? Like
yeah,
what
yeah,
it
for
would
sure.
do. So is that a core part of what you think that has made you
I
successful?
I
Or
mean, obviously, it takes two to tango. I mean, so yes, because uh, what I'm trying to say is that I think there the opportunity is not like as widespread as it is, for example, here. But you know, it only takes like one or two, three people to kind of make a real difference, right? So, for example, overall the curriculum, if you look at like what they're teaching or they were teaching us, is like very outdated. Like it's
right,
nowhere near where it should be, and so on. And so, like that's one way to look at it. But like the other way to look at it, that like again, if you pay attention, there's always like, and if you go to Stanford, there's just like every professor is like world class, and there's like hundreds of them, and you can like pick and choose what you want to do. Here, it's an exception, but the opportunity is there. And again, and of course, I mean, but you have to have like an extra effort, right? So, for example, like in some of those classes, um, there was like the professor. She was a woman, um, and her classes were like always noisy because like people would chat in the back and talk, and like she wouldn't care, and like you had to sit on in the first row and really pay attention so you could listen to what what the things that she was telling was like mind blowing, because like it was, again, is like she would come with this like printouts from like intel.com talking about like CPUs that were not even on the market yet, and would explain the architecture and so on. But like most people didn't even realize that that was what's going on. So yes, I mean, it took me to sit in the front row and like be annoying and ask her questions and follow ups and like chase her in the corridor with more questions. Like, yes, I did my part,
right.
but she had to be there for me to be able to do that. So
I love how humble you are about this, but this is a fantastic another example for all of our listeners who continue to listen, that having such a growth mindset, having an opportunity to appreciate what's being provided to you, and but having more the curiosity to explore, it sounds like clearly has what has led you to find the opportunity. So now you school ended. Can we talk about how from school in Armenia you ended up in Geneva, right? You ended up working
right.
at CERN. So
Yeah, so it was like, actually it was like it wasn't like this like strict transition. So like first time I went to Geneva, like to CERN as an intern, I was a junior, so it was like third year. And so the way it happened is that like I was also working in a lab. So and like the lab had like decades long kind of tradition of like collaborating with a lot of institutions all over the world, including CERN. And I was in this team that was working at CERN, and they basically hired us. Well, they basically had us. The idea was like it was kind of an experiment because they were like really good with physics. They were like world class physicists, but the physics has evolved to a point where like you couldn't do physics without being like really good with computers. And not only that, but like this next generation of CERN experiments were supposed to be done all like via like the network. So they were building this huge like scientific network, and that like if your institute was not connected to the network, you were left out. And it was like pretty, and all these things were like all the technology was nascent and the technology itself was being developed, and they were like, "Oh, well, what are we
So for
going to
some of
do?"
the younger audience who might not realize what we're talking about here, CERN was also the people who created the internet, right? At the
Well, yeah, they created, like, the person who invented the World Wide Web was at CERN. And by the way, the so his name is Tim Berners-Lee. He's a professor at MIT. He's now in the US. but the person I was like extremely lucky to actually work with the person who mentored Tim Berners-Lee when I was at CERN. So that was really cool. But yeah, so the reason why we were in this research lab, because the people there were like, okay, we need someone to help us figure out this thing where like we can, we can connect, we can build these networks internally and make it part of this like global network. So that's why they hired us. And so that's why they
That's
had us. And then
amazing. What an
right.
incredible thing, man.
But
That's
it was like, it was an experiment because it's, it's funny like how they managed to teach us something that they didn't know, which if you think, but like they
which
teach
is like
us
every
like,
other startup. We're gonna build something that we don't know if it's gonna work for
yeah,
us.
pretty much. Yeah. So in that regard, it was like a very kind of similar environment, but that kind of led but like there's a funny story because people at CERN were like, I mean, for them it was like a nuisance, right? Because why, like, they had their own thing to do. And basically my boss, he went and was just like, hey, I have this like two kids, because like I was, when we started, it was like 16, 17, something like that.
Wow.
And so just like, I have two kids, they're really smart, like give them a problem to solve. And the person who later became my boss at CERN, and he later told me the story that he basically, my boss from the lab was like very kind of insisting and like annoying, and it's just like, okay, I'll give them a problem which I don't think is possible to solve, so they'll just like go away. And so they gave us a problem, and took us 2 years, but we cracked it. And we were like so naive that like, if they told this us later, I'd be like, no, it's a joke, we're not going to be able to do this, they just don't want to hear from us ever. But like, we didn't know that, like, and like we found a way to solve it. And then the guys at CERN were surprised, just like, okay, how did this happen? And that's how we got like, that's how basically I got like an internship at CERN, at like while I was still a student,
That's
with
amazing.
another friend of mine.
So I would love to dig into this a little bit, right? So here
Sure.
you are, a junior in school. You're at a world-class institution in Europe, right? So you're away
Yeah.
from family, you're away from everybody. Uh, your, I guess I'm not going to call naivety, because I don't see that. I guess your eagerness to want to solve a very complicated problem, and given that opportunity to be able to solve it and then being able to do it 2 years later is phenomenal. So reflecting on why you as a young man was able to do that is one thing, but more importantly, as a leader now, a CTO of a very successful company and on the verge of becoming bigger and larger, what are some lessons do you think as a leader you can implement or reflect on that allowed a junior at a school to be able to do this? Is there one or two things that if you reflect back on that you would say, these are the reasons I was able to be successful? And no, the answer is not, let me give them a complicated problem that they cannot solve. There's obviously
Right.
something in that environment that allowed that to occur as well too.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because now we have like interns at Bardeen from Berkeley, and it's like and like in less than a year, uh, they already wrote like 2 research papers, and one got accepted at like a top machine learning conference. The other one we just submitted. We'll see where it goes. But I mean, I think it's just like the cycle goes
The
on.
cycle, yeah, exactly, the
Yeah.
cycle.
And I mean, I think there are a few things for this to happen. Like, first, I think there has to be like fundamentals matter, right? So you like there besides like the desire and daring and so on, like you have to work really hard. Like there is no, I don't know, like any way around it, right? So like you have to be willing to put in the hours, and then you have to like all the fundamental knowledge that's required to do something great, has to be there. It only comes with effort. Like there is no other way around it. But the other thing I think is like not being afraid to kind of push the boundaries. I think like one thing that was really, I actually still find challenging, especially when like I talk to people like honestly outside Silicon Valley. I wanted to say Armenia, but it's not just Armenia. It's like outside a very small circle of, you know, Silicon Valley. And I mean, there are other places like, you know, that like obviously CERN and others. It's not just Silicon Valley, but like in most every place you go and most every person you speak to, like they are used to consuming. Like you're like you get a car, you plug in your key, you drive away. You get a computer, you press a button, something happens. With programmers, it's the same thing. It's just like you like, you know, even you're a programmer, there are a lot of people who have this like mental barrier where like, oh, this is like React. It came from Facebook. I'm using React. It's fine, but I'm not the one who created it. And like, I'm not even thinking, it's just like there. Or like with, and there's a lot like operating systems and stuff like that. And I think one very important kind of mental shift that has to happen is that you have to realize that all these things are created by people, and there is no mental, like you shouldn't be thinking of like, oh, like I I'm just a user, I'm just a consumer. And I think again, in a place like Armenia, it's very difficult. For Germans, it's much easier because they look around and like they see Volkswagens and Audis, and their uncle works at like an Audi, you know, factory, and they know that it's like in Armenia there is no such thing. Like, you know, there's like, at least, you know, in terms of technology, there is very little, like it's not natural for us. And so I think for me, one of the biggest and things was like being part of that like world-class lab is to realize that, I mean, you shouldn't be afraid of like, you know, working on hard things, like pushing, like it's not going to be easy, it's going to be like much harder, but it's possible. And so I think that understanding with like the necessary kind of background of like basic knowledge, that's, I mean, it's free and accessible to everyone. You just have to take it.
Wow, I
And I
love
think,
that. You said so many amazing things here. Let me just kind of quickly summarize what I heard and then help me understand if I so first is you need a solid foundation, a base of knowledge of understanding how whatever you're using works, right? That's you need to understand what is the core principles that are driving the operating system, let's say in programming language or whatever it might be, and why does the system work? The second thing, another layer or another pillar is realizing that someone just like you came across another problem and they were able to solve it. So there should be any other problems that you shouldn't be afraid of just the problem that exists. It is going to be solvable over time. So you shouldn't just be appreciating and consuming the product. You should also be understanding that, hey, that is solving a specific problem, and another human in this world has solved all of these different things, and why not you? Why not you being the one that could solve this potential problem as well too?
right.
So having that belief in yourself and having that more or less fundamental understanding, and those two things coupled together will allow you to focus and be able to put in the hours, put in the effort, think about the hypotheses and how you can go about solving this particular issue. Is that
Yeah.
a good summation?
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good summary. Yeah.
Amazing. So let's go from CERN now. So you're at CERN, you did the internship, you solved an incredible problem, right? That has also now allowed you, ironically, to use that as part of your leadership here at Bardeen with the internship program that we talked about. What happened after CERN though? So from CERN, did you end up then coming back to Armenia, or did you then end up coming to US? Can you tell me a little
Yeah.
bit what happened with your career at that stage?
Yes. I mean, like I had to finish school. Like, you know, in Armenia, you don't get to drop out because like if you drop out, you go to the army. And then
A pretty good incentive to finish school.
yeah, and not only that, but so basically, you know, I finished my bachelor's. At that point, you know, like after, you know, normally like the reward for excellent work is more work. And so after this, obviously, like initial problem, it, you know, kept kind of going and developing. And I think throughout, like, when I was like doing my master's, at that point I was still working at a lab. So, and then like going to CERN for, basically in between, like for summer and for like, winter break and so on, because like I was a full-time student. And then I went to grad school. And then when I graduated, when I was like about to graduate my grad school, which also had to happen very fast, because again, if you don't, you go to army. But like, if you do, then you're free, you're exempt. And so they offered me a job at CERN. Like they basically offered me a very, very lucrative position. At that point, I was probably like whatever, like 25 years old. So at that point, I was just like going there. They knew me pretty well. I've spent quite a bit of time there already. And I mean, there was like a twist there, is that normally like those positions are only available for like CERN member states, people like citizens of like CERN member states, and Armenia is not. And so like there was a lot of people kind of tried and lobbied for me really hard to kind of make an exception to get that position for me. I think I was like the first person from Armenia who got that. I think after me there were a few other people, I think from the same group, from our group, which is like talks to the quality of the leadership. And like but then, so at that point I finished my studies. I moved to Geneva for good. I spent a few years there, worked with some incredible people. Again, that was like another kind of opening your eyes to like the amazing things that you can do. But at that point I was 26.
Wow.
And it's like,
you've done so much already at 26. That's incredible.
right. And like it was like I wanted to do something else. And I always the thing is that like CERN is really amazing, but like and it employs as many kind of computer people, like various incarnations of like computer, like scientists, engineers, and so on, as like maybe even more than physicists. But it's a physics lab. Like the end result is like a scientific paper, a Nobel Prize, and it's research, it's fundamental research. And I wanted to be somewhere where what I did, like the thing that I worked, was the product, as opposed to being something like very like it's part of the story. Like you cannot do the research without the infrastructure that I was like helping build. But it's not an infrastructure like it's not a software, it's not a technology company.
Right.
Also, I mean, I've at that point I've been there for what, like 7-8 years, give or take. I was going back and forth. It was like very familiar. It was like very comfortable for me. And so one thing led to another. Actually, it was like the Google Summer of Code that I did. That like I came to Silicon Valley. There was a conference that the Google organized for Summer of Code, kind of mentors and org admins. At the same time, there was a startup school, like the Y Combinator startup school at Stanford. And I went to startup school, and Mark Andreessen, so basically the web was invented at CERN. So HTML, HTTP were invented at CERN by like a brilliant guy, but it was like popularized and monetized by Americans, and Mark Andreessen was like at the forefront of it.
Right.
And he told this story. So like I was sitting in the audience, and there were like Zuckerberg was speaking. I think like Drew Hoffman was speaking, the founder of Dropbox. So Mark Andreessen, and Mark told this anecdote where basically, after like people like CERN did this thing, like they started working on a browser. They like very quickly created this like standardization body, and like he told this anecdote where he was like some people at CERN were fighting him on introduction of like an image tag in HTML.
Right.
And so because like who would ever need like images on the web? And the audience was like bursted laughing, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, I'm on the wrong side of this equation, you know? Because like there's like I knew exactly the the kinds of people
You're
who
like, I
like
know exactly who potentially was fighting with him about
yeah,
this.
yes, pretty much. And because like at CERN you have this like kind of like you have amazingly like brilliant people, but like it's a big organization, there's a lot of bureaucracy. It's like any big organization, it has its like kind of own like rules and idiosyncrasies and so on. And so for a good reason, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like, okay, no, I gotta be here. Like I need to do something else. Although I mean, for all intents and purposes, my life was set. I could stay in Geneva, have like pretty good job.
You had a
Maybe
great
it's
job,
yeah,
comfortable, but
yeah.
I guess the summer made you realize, at least, is there something more? Is there
Yeah,
something
so
more
like
you could be
I
doing?
have to do like I felt like I have to do something more. It was like you know, and again I mean serendipity. One thing led to another. So like a guy that we lived in the same building at, and who by the way like who was now a programmer in Silicon Valley, and who by the way saw the computer very first time at our place because like my dad showed him the computer. I didn't know this story. He told me like years later. Like they had a pretty like interesting opening in their company, and so they just hired me. And so I packed my bags and like um, you know and we
Left.
moved to
Yeah.
yeah came here.
And so how old are you now? You're late 20s or
26. So there's like
26?
26 when I moved here. Yeah.
Amazing. And so here you are now, you're 26, 27, you're in Silicon Valley. And where
Yeah.
are you working? Where did you end up taking the
So
job?
yeah, so like it was a company called Qualis. It was like a really cool company. I joined pre-IPO, so it was like
Okay.
relatively small. It was like it IPO'd while I was there. It was really
So
nice.
your first startup experience at this stage, right? So you kind
Yeah,
of
it was a startup, but it was like a late stage. It was like
late stage
200
startup.
people
Yeah.
already at that point. Yeah. Um, and I mean, it was great. I was working on like a very interesting problem. It was a very different work environment from like what I was used to, from like an academia to enterprise B2B software, working in like security. Like while I was there, I had like a lot of fun with like the friend of mine who essentially kind of, I mean, he didn't hire me, but like he made this happen. We did some cool like security research together. We because like we were both like new dads and we were bored, and we found some like pretty bad security vulnerabilities in like baby cams that we had at home. And so like we did like we like did some research. So I had a lot of fun. But again, I mean, I did two three I stayed there for like 3 years, and like I was like every 6 to 9 months I was like getting promoted. I was like life was sweet. But again, it was like ran into the same problem with at CERN, with like this was a security company, and what I was working on was like infrastructure, so like compute, organizing compute, dealing with large amounts of data. And it was not an infrastructure company, and it was not, again, it's like a more tech company than CERN, but like not enough. It was
Right.
like, okay, like what's the next level? And so at that
So do
point,
you think part of it is you were looking to learn and you weren't in an environment to learn, or what could it
I
possibly be?
yes, so first of all, I was looking for, that's not exactly how I formulated to myself, but like what I was looking for is a place where there would be kind of the problems that I don't know how to solve. So I guess yes, like you would like yes, that's the and like people that I could learn from at like a faster pace, and a company that at that point it was just like 2 3 years into the IPO, very well established like market leader position, growing 20-30% like year over year. So it was like very steady, very nice. But I wanted something more dynamic, and a lot of things were happening in the infrastructure space. And I wanted a startup. I wanted like a very like an earlier stage startup. And so my two criteria that it had to be world class, and it had to be like I wanted like infrastructure software to be the product. The reason because is that like I always wanted to work on like operating systems, understand the depth of like how computers work and so on. And like you don't get to do that unless that is the product, right? And again, like I didn't like, I I wasn't particularly interested in going to like Microsoft, for example, because I wanted a startup. I wanted somewhere where it was like would be really small. Because I realized that like I actually tried to start a company back then, like, and I had some ideas and so on. I just like I realized that no, like I have to learn. I'm not ready. And that's why it was like to me, it was like, okay, you cannot start a company right now, or then like let's go and see how others do it, but like let's have a first row seat basically.
Right. So let me find an environment that might have a few colleagues I can learn with that's a little bit later on, but not as late stage as at the current company I'm at.
So basically I identified like top 3 companies that were doing infrastructure at a time, were like funded by the Andreessens and the Sequoias and the Koslas of this world. And it was like almost like one was like 9 people, I was like 8 people, I would be like employee number 9. The other one was like 20 people, and the third one was like 40 people. So one was like seed, the other one was Series A, and the third one was Series B. And like I interviewed with all of them. I got 3 offers, so I got offers from all of them, and like ended up joining Mesosphere, which was like the furthest along. But the reason like why I joined it, because I asked all the like at that point like startup is like 40 people, like your hiring manager is the founder normally, like and so like you're talking to all the founders.
Right.
And I asked them, like I asked each founder like who is your competition, and like that like the other 2, like of course they called each other and also Mesosphere and like a couple other companies. And like the one that I joined, I asked like, "Who is your competition?" He went with like, "Oh, AWS and VMware." And I'm like, "Oh, what about this other smaller guys?" Like, no, I don't care about them. Like, we'll crush them. It didn't quite work out that way, but that's what kind of
drew you in. Yeah.
Drew you in. And at that point, I was very upfront with him about like, "Hey, this is why I'm joining. Like, I want to join because I want to start a company. I want to join here because I want to learn." And he was like, "Yeah, sure. Like, give me," he said, 18 to 24 months, and I promise I'll help you when after that. I was like, great. And that's exactly how it ended up working out. Of course, it took like 5 years for that to happen. But again, like, serendipity and so on. But like the guy who hired me, he ended up writing the first check for Bardeen, and he introduced me to my co-founder.
Amazing.
And so, and he's still on our board. So,
So what I could take here from this experience, at least, is you learned you learned something about yourself that was, hey, I need hard problems to solve. I need to be surrounded by people that can help me learn this. I need to take the initiative and not wait for this to happen, but I actually need to go find where this environment exists for me.
Right.
Then you went through, did the research, found the organizations, went through the interview process, and was candid and honest and open and direct on what your long-term goal was, to make sure that there was a fit on both sides, right?
Right.
Hey,
yeah.
I'm not here just for a paycheck. I can go work wherever I
exactly,
work. Yeah. But I'm here for what all this other more. But if you give me the learnings that I want, you will get the best of me in terms of what you need to accomplish, right? So that is a phenomenal lesson for most people who are listening in. It's be open, be comfortable, be candid, be direct, and make sure is that something you embrace now with your team members as well as a leader?
I mean,
Like,
100%. I think like I ask this question every time when we're hiring, like, and normally it's people kind of frown upon it a bit because like it's just like cliche HR question. How do I answer it right? But I always ask, so what is your long-term goal? Like, what do you want to do? And if there are no right answers, but like the answer that I like the most, let's put it this way, is that when someone knows that like I want to be a founder or I want to be like I want to create like a first class like industry research lab and I want to be a chief scientist or this or that. Everyone has their goals. There is no right or wrong, but I think like amazing things happen where when it's clear and when there is alignment, and I'm not talking about it in kind of like again like cliche way, but indeed if you know that okay, this is what this person wants to learn, I feel like because people who are like motivated, people who know what they want, and if especially if you know that if you're in an environment where that can provide it for you, I think it's kind of when you're doing a startup, there's I mean, it's not that the entire world is against you, but you're much more likely to fail than to succeed, just statistically. And so you want as many things kind of helping you, pushing you in the right direction. And so, and none of these things alone is, neither necessary nor sufficient. But the more of these things you have, the more of these things are aligned, the more likely you are to succeed. And so yes, it's like this is something that we very much uh, uh, kind of practice every day, because unlike a big company, startups, there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. I was telling someone today that what today is table stakes for any whatever like AI company product 2 years ago literally was fiction.
right.
Like if you would tell someone this is going to be like table stakes, no, it was like no, it was people kind of dreamed about it, and so it changes so quickly. You have to adapt so quickly that it you people have to they're like certain kinds of people and certain kinds of circumstances that you have to optimize for, you know,
That is so. I think we
to
were
be
talking about that
successful.
before the show even started, right? Like at the speed that things
Yeah,
are moving now, it at least for us as an agency, and I don't know how this applies to you guys at Bardeen, but it's like even our processes, it's like we're reinventing it consistently. We're like, okay, we did this a
yeah,
month ago, and this was great a month ago, but it feels like there's a better, newer way of doing
yeah,
this more
yeah,
efficiently. So I 100% agree. And being surrounded and having a culture within the organization, it sounds like at least that's what you guys are fostering, is having people who are adaptable, who are open to learning, who are open to pushing the processes and are open to trying in new things and seeing where that can take them. It was just phenomenal. So now, how did Bardeen start? So give me the inspiration of Bardeen and where when did you know you were ready? Right. So you went in, you said, I'm gonna start a startup. You went
yeah.
into an organization with 40 people. You started learning. It sounded like it took about 4 or 5 years, and
Right.
then you were ready. When did the problem come to
Yeah.
that you wanted to solve, and when did you know, okay, it's time to do this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I would like started at like a 40, 50-person startup. At a peak, it was like 350. And
Wow.
kind of my responsibilities like grew with the company. So when I joined as like a tech lead in a team, and then like soon after I was responsible for like a big kind of product line. And it's like I very quickly went through like someone who you know does work, writes code, fixes stuff, like understands how systems work, to like someone who has to wrangle presentations, meetings, customer calls, managing managers who manage managers who manage managers and all that. And I realized that 70% of my time is basically like a mildly sophisticated script could do what I'm doing with like very high success. And and I was just like, why don't we write that script and see what happens? And so I literally started writing a script that would replace me. I called it like mini me. I wanted to create a Slack bot that would like pretend to be me on Slack, because like it was just like, as a manager, that's what you do, right? Like you deal with people, and then you have to go and remind your directors that like, oh, we have a meeting with like an SVP tomorrow. Do you have your slides in order? Like, let me check. And so I kind of started doing that, and it was also, I mean, like any startup, there were like ups and downs and so on. And I think for the first few years, I didn't have time to think about anything when I just joined, because we're like growing so fast. I was just like drinking from the fire hose and kind of trying to tame all that chaos. Like toward the end, it kind of started to level up a bit. And I was just like, okay, what is my next move? What do I want to do? And so, yeah, I started doing this thing that would, replace me. And I thought I was basically building a tool for myself. So
Right.
for someone who is, who has to deal with people, who has to manage an organization. And then the guy who hired me, actually, who started that company, the CEO, he moved on. They hired a professional CEO, and like he was also kind of, I guess, like trying to figure out what to do next. And eventually he decided to do a fund. And he also met some other people, and they were starting a fund. And one day I was just like, uh, I randomly ran into him in the office, and it was just like, hey, let's go have lunch. I was like, sure. And I was getting ready to pitch him, because like, I mean, I again, but like I didn't think that it was the time. I wanted to, you know, build a
Just get
bit more
advice.
confidence
Get
and so
advice,
on.
and you hear.
And like, I basically I went to lunch with him, and I didn't say anything, and he just like started pitching me my idea. It was just like eerily, it was like weird. It was like, where's this coming from? Where did you learn about this? But it was like, it was in my words describing me the problem that I was having, and also the solution that I had in mind, which was like, it was, I was like, where's this coming from? This makes no sense. Like, why are you in my head? And so like turned out that like he met my now co-founder, who pitched him that idea,
Oh wow.
because my co-founder was like in a pretty similar situation in a different startup where that he co-founded before, where he went like, he's very technical, but he went from like being someone who builds cool stuff and hacks and does engineering to someone who has to kind of wrangle meetings and this and that. And so um and so the and so it was like, I think you should do this, like you should meet this guy. And so we met, and we kind of were like, started off like finishing each other's sentences. And then he showed me, it was funny because like we had a meeting where like I was so like my stuff was like, my product was going to be called mini me,
Right.
and he decided to call his thing like me.ai, and that became Bardeen eventually. But the funny thing, he was telling me that like, so basically him and like uh Flo, my former boss and now investor, they were going to the meeting, and Pascal, my co-founder, he told me that like they were like heading to some dinner, and he was like, I was like super mad at Flo that he told you my idea. But like Flo was like, no, I didn't tell him your
You're like, no, this is
idea.
my idea.
Yeah, it was like, so and so, and that was like,
Did you
that
guys
was
demo each other's code to each other? You're like, let me
yeah.
demo
I mean,
you
we just like
how far
we
I've
live.
gotten with this
It's
thing.
funny. I'm now in San Francisco. I'm like in a building next to like, there's like this little park. We would like sit on a park bench, and like on like laptop with like laptop on my knees. It's like, hey, look what I have. Like, no, look what I have. And so um yeah, and it was like right before COVID. Like we didn't know that like COVID was a thing, but it was like beginning
So
of
this was in December. This was probably January, February, right
no, it was
before?
like end of January, beginning of February
Oh
2020.
wow, like literally right before it like
Yeah.
really.
And
Okay.
then, what happened is that we had this like amazing conversation. We chatted a few times more, and then like Pascal disappeared for like literally like for like a week. I didn't hear from him. And then he came back. I was just like, sorry, I was like sick. I don't know what happened. So like later it turned out that he had COVID. He was like one of the first ones, uh, you know, but like, and then at that point, like then lockdown started. And so, anyway, like long story short, 3, 4 months later, I quit my job at Mesosphere, and we started Bardeen.
That's
And
amazing.
Florian, the guy, he was like he led our seed round, so he
Wow, that's
wrote us a check.
phenomenal. So two different engineers, it sounds like, right? Coming across the same potential problem, connected by one founder in a time that the world is about to go through a change, and then here's the beginning of Bardeen.
Yeah,
So let's talk about that. So here's COVID started. I'm sure this is the first time it sounds like you're working remotely, right? Like you hadn't
yeah. This was
prior
the
to
first
this,
time. Yeah,
you worked at CERN, Bardeen as a whole is a remote first organization. Is that fair to say? Or
right. I mean, when we started like there was no choice. And anyway, we were thinking to like both. Again, there was like another thing that we were pretty aligned on, that like we want to do a remote, you know, even before COVID. But I mean, COVID just made it like you basically stripped us of a choice. And so yeah, I mean, we started remote. He was in New York, and he couldn't stay. He was kicked out. But basically, um, you remember there were like, during COVID, the administration did a lot of weird things, and
right?
he was kind of, collateral damage. So he moved to Germany, where he's from originally. But the good thing about it was that like actually I had a pretty good network in Germany, because the previous company, we had a big presence in Hamburg, and I knew a lot of engineers, and like some of the best engineers I knew and I wanted to work with. Uh, like one of the first guys I hired actually was um, the guy who was my intern at CERN, and who came to like who came to Mesosphere, and then from Mesosphere he came to Bardeen. So I have a very long history with him. Um, and he was in Germany, and then our like first, I don't know, I would say 10, maybe even 15 people we hired were all in Europe. And so then all of a sudden, him being in Frankfurt made a lot of sense, because you want someone in the close by time zone. And so yeah, so he ended up staying there, and we like hired. At some point we started hiring also in the US. And
Right.
so now we have, I think it's like San Francisco, we have like more people than anywhere right now, but it's
How big are you
otherwise
guys? How, as an organization, how large are you at this point? Are you
around 30 people, give or take.
30 people, give or take? Okay. And what is so obviously the current problem, if you had to simplify and explain the current problem you guys are solving, what is the main problem you guys are solving for different companies and organizations?
Yeah, so we are helping um, frontline knowledge workers to be more effective, to kind of streamline their workflows using uh, using AI.
Amazing. So new workflows, new ways of making them more efficient, giving them more superhuman power per se. Is
Yeah,
that
so uh, like if you think about it, AI fundamentally enables, like, what is this, like, why is AI cool for work, right? One is, I think it makes a lot of things easier, like generating content, or all the things that we used to do manually, beyond the obvious cases, like like generating content. It can also make it easy to kind of categorize. It can take a lot of kind of work that before required like intellectual abilities, now like computers can do, right? So like it's net new capabilities. So that's great. But there are two problems there. One is how do you go from like an idea to working AI, call it an agent or automation or something that works, that actually saves you some time? Because at the end of the day, all the problems that you like, why computers, like why people use computers, it's like in at work, at least, it's like they're either saving time or saving money. You're always doing one of those two things, right? And so one thing is that, like, okay, now I have an idea, I want to do X better. Like, how do I build this thing? Do I have to program it myself? Do I have to configure some tool? Do I have to hire someone to help me, right? Even like, think of a flow that, for example, a salesperson or like a marketer goes through. Like, you have to like find someone who is from your audience, like add them to some tracking system, figure out what's the best way to reach out to them. Then once they respond, it's just like you have to manage and nurture that relationship, right? And like this pattern repeats across, hiring, selling, marketing, all this is a lot of the pattern is the same. The tools are different, but like essentially it's the same. And so how do you kind of string it all together, glue it together, and like make it work, right? Because all of us, any enterprise, we have like tens of applications that we have to deal with, right? From like, and we spend most of our time kind of copy pasting, being like moving data from one system to another. So you need like a technological solution for that. And one thing that AI enables is to make it much easier to interact with it. So where like before it took a programmer to do something, or like someone who's like very technical, can wrangle like different systems together, put even something like Zapier is not accessible for most every person, right? And so what AI helps us do there is like make it very simple, where like you can explain something in like human language and it can deliver that for you, take care basically of all the kind of gory technical details. So that's like one fundamental thing where like AI makes technology more accessible. The other thing is the process that I explained. If you go and ask any recruiter, like, hey, is what you do repetitive? Probably their answer would be no, because they would tell you every position is different, every company is different, every candidate is different, hiring managers are different, circumstances are different. And they're not wrong, but what people miss is that they spend, like, you pay your recruiters, the actual work is talking to people and then spending 200 milliseconds on like what's above the fold on LinkedIn to see whether it's a good candidate or not. But right, they spend 200 milliseconds doing that, and then for every candidate they spend like minutes copy pasting stuff from one place to another, following up, and so the other place where AI can help is to help discover those things that are automatable, right? So basically, imagine someone sitting, like watching over your shoulder for a week and then coming to us like, hey, Hamlet, John, so this week you spent like 4 hours copy pasting from like LinkedIn to HubSpot, and then you spent 4 hours copy pasting from like ChatGPT to Gmail, and this and that. And so that is another thing that like, this like with AI, this is what we mean by with AI, right? So
So you guys help take away what I'm hearing clearly is you guys help create workflows or processes or that are repeatable and take away some of the mundane elements of it. Is that
well, we don't create, well, like we hopefully don't create more work for anyone, but
no, I'm saying like a process. So you find whatever
right,
the inefficiencies in the workflow are, and you streamline
yes,
it so it becomes more
yeah,
efficient.
right,
Okay,
exactly, yeah.
amazing. And is this customizable for any organization of any size? So like you can go to a company and you can diagnose it for them, or is it no? These are the
Yeah,
workflows, and you kind of plug and play with that.
I mean, that it's a great question. I think to this day, this kind of approach was only available, accessible to like very big companies. And the way it would work is that like you would sign a big contract with Microsoft, they would show up with their Power Automate, and then they would bring like an army of consultants from Capgemini. They would literally like look over your shoulder, like talk to you, interview you, look at like, you know, central like your processes. Like imagine what happens when you hire like a person, let's say in a big company, like there are like probably like 30 different departments that have to do
Right.
something, right? So like they would basically
Or a
do
large
this.
consulting agency coming in
Yeah,
and kind of
yeah.
evaluating
So
your
like
workflows and
basically what would
process.
happen is that like they would study for months and then they would create some automations, and then the problem is like the moment they left, the automation is obsolete because like processes change, people change, stuff changes. And so the way we want to solve this problem is bottoms up. We basically sit in your browser, we're a Chrome extension. We sit in your browser and we're not yet looking into like oh, what is like Sally from HR doing when someone shows up versus like, you know, Molly from IT doing when someone is like, we don't know, we don't have that connection yet, but like we want to make like Sally's life easier, right? So like if, you know, if she's an IT person and she spends like 4 hours every day, like doing something that can be automated by means of API, or some other means like AI agents, API, doesn't matter. Somehow you can automate it. Like we want to surface it. So like, hey, we noticed this, and then when and then kind of help them along the way to kind of build an automation. So like
Oh,
an
got it. So it's a
ideal.
Chrome extension that will notice a particular pattern that can be improved upon, and then it will say, "Hey,
Right.
by the way, we noticed that you've been copy and pasting
Yeah.
this information consistently
Right.
every day for an hour or every day for 30 minutes,
Something
whatever,
like that.
it
Yeah.
might be. Hey, you go
Right.
into Google Sheet, you update this, you change this every
Yeah.
day between these hours.
And it will like reduce that to a button. Like it will give you a button. Like if your workflow is like go to LinkedIn, copy paste someone to a Google Sheet, then go Google their company, then go to like Capterra, read the reviews from Capterra, summarize it in Google Sheets and so on. Like we'll tell you like ideally that like next time you show up to LinkedIn profile, there's like a button there inside the website. So like you click a button, it's like, hey, we discovered this and that. Like, you know, do you want this button to live here from now on? So like next time you need to do something, you just click a button and like that entire thing happens for
Wow,
you.
that's pretty cool. That
And
that
then
that is really cool.
yeah, and then the other thing is that we want to focus on things like the right things to automate is not like schedule me a vacation, right? Because you know, scheduling vacation is like whatever, like 20-step process. And if even if like you screw up 5% of the time for like 20 times in a row, it becomes like a crapshoot. It becomes like almost, you know, very like single digit percentage that the overall process is going to succeed. And you're only doing it like whatever, thrice a year.
Right.
We're not focusing on things like that. We want to focus on things that you do much more repeatedly, and that
Right.
your
So
colleagues also do.
SDR
Because
roles, like something a typical SDR would be doing would be a
yeah,
perfect. Something a recruiter you
yeah,
mentioned earlier would be a
yeah,
perfect use
yeah,
case.
yeah. SDRs are the kind of prime customers. They love our product. Recruiters, same deal. And you know, other verticals like real estate
Content
people.
writers or
Yeah,
researchers,
right.
all okay.
Yeah,
Link
yeah,
builders, I'm sure people who do link building would
yes.
be ideal.
Yes.
PR,
So like
outreach.
content people, so for example, what like content people do is, I mean, at least like people who do like sophisticated, right? So for example, we do this ourselves. We're like, we need to go and like collect, like, I don't know, we're going to a competitor's page. We need to get like, visit 30 different pages, collect all the information, summarize it, and then like give it to our content creators, right? If we want to create like, you know, product marketing content, it's like, hey, this is the summary. So normally it would take, or like, you know, VCs, for example, when like they see some like product announcement somewhere on Product Hunt, they need to go research the founders. They need to go like find product reviews, go to the website. Normally, like an intern would spend an afternoon compiling like a brief for a partner. And this is something like that's the kind of process that we can just, reduce it basically to a click.
It's amazing. So
So
it's a really advanced macro, is what I'm hearing almost.
you can call it that. I think I would like the way I would like to think about it is like it's a platform that kind of connects to a lot of tools that you use every day, and it connects using like first class kind of API. So basically, if we want to fill a spreadsheet, we don't go open a spreadsheet in the background and start like filling it cell by cell,
Right.
but we make an API call, and so wherever possible, we use like
If an
real.
API has to exist from where you're gathering the data from, or what if the API doesn't exist? Can you still collect the
Well,
data?
because we're in a browser, so we have kind of data gathering, collecting, scraping, clicking, all the capabilities are built in to Bardeen, so you can do that. So we have that's like a catch-all, right? So if the API is not there, then you can use Bardeen itself to kind of automate the data gathering. But where in places where API is there, like for OpenAI, I wouldn't like, we wouldn't open like a chat GPT in a tab and
Yeah.
kind of try to manipulate it. Like we just call the API. Same for Google Sheets, same for Salesforce, same for like HubSpot and Slack and Zoom and Calendar and all the things that have
So
an
you
API. We use an
default to
API.
API, and if it exists, don't default to API. Go default to
Exactly.
browser if it doesn't,
Yeah,
basically.
you got it.
I,
Yeah.
I love it. This is incredible. Where do you see, and I'm going to be cognizant of time, and this is usually how we end up wrapping up a lot of our
Yeah.
meetings, is the future. So let's kind of take it there. At the pace that, how fast the technology is evolving, and I know we talked about this a little bit bit earlier, and it seems like you've always been a person as a core of who you are that is looking for the latest, newest problems to solve. So I'm really excited to see where you're gonna take this answer particularly. Where do you see, and I'm not going to tell you 5 years from now because I think that's insane,
Yeah.
because there's no way we all can
Yeah.
predict that.
Yeah.
Where do you see the puck going right now? Let's say in the next year and a half with AI. What capabilities are you pretty sure is going to be doable and capable that are just going to blow people's minds away? And anyone that is building an application similar to like Bardeen that is already thinking about how can we potentially be utilizing this within our application?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, for like blowing the minds away, I think like GPT was like such mind-blowing experience, like Chat GPT as a product for everyone, that like I think it will be, again, I mean, like the kind of things that we're seeing like incremental was like a fiction 3 years ago, but because like this phase transition from like before and after for ChatGPT, I think it will be pretty hard to impress people. And I think it's very hard to say. What I think there's like equally smart people on both sides saying that like it's kind of naive to expect the same rate of improvement the others, but the data suggesting is like the party is not about to stop just yet. So it will get it will keep getting better. I think in terms of where we're going, I think like one thing that I personally am very excited about is that I think as we go, we're kind of learning to work with limitations of technology better and like try to make it more. So, for example, this thing that I explained to you was like from like explaining an action and like doing something. There have been countless like demos on Twitter, like people demoing, and this is pretty mind blowing. But there is literally no product on the market today that actually does that. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of progress, where a lot of these demos will start becoming a reality. So I think like with LLMs and Gen AI is this like interesting phenomena where it's very deceptive. It's kind of like your instincts don't work anymore when it's like, it's so easy to make a demo. Then you think that like, oh, it's like, because like normally from 0 to 1, it's a huge thing. Like here, 0 to 1 is like trivial. But then you kind of hit the wall where you least expect it, because you go from like 0 to 1 is like, oh, it's like 60% accurate. Of course I have to be able to. From like 0 to 60, it took me an afternoon. Okay, I'll spend a month and get it from like 60 to 90. It turns out like, no, is like you, and so I expect a lot of the kind of what will feel like incremental improvement if you compare to like the demos that you've seen half a year ago. But if you look a year back, 2 years back, that will be like, that will be mind blowing. I think what it means for like, I think for like work and automation, I think it's just changing, and it's changing at a pace. I think the process that you describe, that you guys do at your agency, I think you're like at the avant-garde. Like not everyone is there yet, but whoever is not there yet is either going to adapt or die. Like there is not going to be that. I think the other thing is that, surprisingly, I think there's a lot of apprehension and fear of the technology, and it's a bit where like people, I feel like, are getting fed up. And so that combined with this like not being able to deliver on all the promises, because like you see like a lot of startups shutting down, a lot of like very high profile startups kind of folding into bigger companies and so on. So you already see that like, I think that combined with the fear, there is a chance that it's just going to, again, I mean, I shouldn't say this because so far it's like no signs of getting boring, but
Right.
I think there's also a risk where like the technology is not able to keep up with people's expectations. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's like if you kind of, I cannot say definitively. I think a lot of the outcomes are possible with like varying degrees of probability. But yeah, I mean, I know that for us, when it comes, like, we have some amazing things in store, and I think there is going to be things that like 2-3 years ago would not be possible, that we and there are other companies working too, is like we'll ship it in a product and people will be using it like it's nothing special, but it is very special, and it is
Well,
very,
thank you, Artem John. So that wraps it up for us today. As Artem, it's been really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for sharing your journey, all the way from the early days to where, from your childhood to obviously your college years, and then your transition over to corporate America, and then eventually to startup world, and then starting a startup at probably one of the most craziest times in history to be able to start a startup, and
arguably,
sharing
for sure.
all of the lessons learned. If there's anyone who wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Is it via LinkedIn or
Like email, LinkedIn, Artem at bardeen.ai, LinkedIn, my DMs are Twitter. Yeah, I'm pretty easy to get hold of.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Artem John. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your journey and insights. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Stay curious and continue to innovate until our next episode. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to subscribe on any of the podcasts that you listen to, and please feel free to leave a review as well. Thanks again. This is Hamlet Azarian from the A Growth Ventures podcast.